So what's up 3D designers? Welcome to this new video. Maybe you didn't expect that there would come a next video because it's been such a long time since our last video. We were just very busy and didn't get around to making any videos. I'm studying right now, multimedia and communication, and my friend Niklas, who's doing this channel with me, is also working already. But now I finally managed to do a video for you. And it'll be about the project that I did yesterday. I had some spare time and I did a little project. Here is my Behance. I uploaded this project on Behance. Link will be in the description. And this right here is the project that I did. I wanted to actually do a full breakdown, or sometimes breakdown, sometimes tutorial, depending on the specific things. I won't go in detail about everything, but I think I will cover the most important parts. So here you can see this personal project. I created several renderings showcasing the Magura logo. Maybe the freaks of you, the bike freaks, know Magura, and it's a company that develops products for bikes and motorcycles. And yeah, I just used this logo because I think it looks cool. But the main goal was to further enhance my lighting techniques for logos. If you want to do this too, I think this breakdown / tutorial will be very helpful for you. Let's just have a look at it. So I have those main hero shots with very interesting lighting where you got some shadows, some highlights there, very realistic textures, and a background that also makes it a little more interesting. Then the same version in yellow and some very detailed close-up shots. And I'll be showing you each of those shots, how they were arranged and composited. Yeah, so this is the project. As I already said, feel free to check those out. I think without further ado, we can just jump into the first software, because we will use Blender and Houdini for this. Most things will be done in Blender, but a few little things inside of Houdini. Oh, actually just one thing. Let's jump into Blender. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to have a logo. So I'll just start with a fresh scene here for you. New, general. And I have this new scene. Yes, I know I don't have the default cube anymore. What a sin. Let's just go to import and then to SVG if you have an SVG file. So actually I should mention beforehand, of course you need the logo file somewhere. Magura logo Wikimedia. There we have it. Okay, now I found it. So yeah, of course you need a file, a two-dimensional file first. And the best thing is if you can find an SVG of your logo, so scalable vector graphics, which is something that you could also export from Illustrator. But if you can't find this, of course, then you only have the option to take a PNG or a JPEG. And then you should vectorize this image. So you should go into Photoshop, for example, or Illustrator, and use this special command that lets you convert a PNG or just a bitmap image into a vector file. I think there are a lot of different tutorials that already show you this on YouTube, so you can check those out if you have a other logo than I have. Okay, but in this case we have this logo right here. I already downloaded it and it's a scalable vector graphics file. So then we can go into Blender and import SVG, navigate to your folder, import, and it imported it already, and you see it's very small. If we just have a reference checked in here, just select all of those paths with Shift and then S for scale and drag out. Let's just scale this up a bit. Now I imported this logo and we have some issues, because if I select this, okay, this looks very good, our main font, but in here we have quite a mess. So if I select the outer one, G to move this, yeah, this is just a huge circle and the other thing is just inside of it. But really we want to have this outer edge as a rim. So what we need to do is actually subtract this mesh from this mesh. And actually I could also enable my screencast key so you can see what I'm doing. Enable them. Okay, now you can see what I'm doing. So we want to subtract this part from this part to get sort of a rich, because in the real logo it's also like this. But of course this depends entirely which logo you have, but this technique that I'll show you works with other logos as well. Okay, so if we select this outer thing, and at the moment it's still a path. Over here you can see the symbol, the path settings, and we want to convert it into a geometry first, because otherwise we can't subtract anything from it, because we will use a Boolean operation and this won't work otherwise. We want to convert this, however at the moment the resolution is too low. If we convert this we can see all sorts of little edges and things, and we don't want this. So let's just crank this up to like 60, something like this. And the inner one also, that's 60. And now select this thing, go to object, convert mesh. Now it's a mesh. If I hit tab and to go into edit mode, we can access all the geometry parts. And on this thing we do the same, object, convert mesh. Okay, so now this thing is a mesh and this thing is a mesh. Now I want to duplicate this inner part. Just Shift D and then right click, and then it's in the same spot as the thing that we copied it from. And then you can hit tab, select everything, switch to face mode with 1, 2, 3. You can select between points, points, edges and faces. In this case faces. Hit E, drag this up. Now we got this thing, and then just tab back into edit mode. Move this down. And now that it's basically inside of this, so it's intersecting with this. Now we can use a Boolean, select this outer ring, or at the moment it's not an outer ring, but we want it to be an outer ring. Go to the modifiers panel and add a Boolean modifier. And then with this little picker, we can pick this object. Now if we hide it and move this thing around, it didn't work yet. Okay, we need to set this to fast, I think then it'll work. Yeah, if we hide this also with H, now we have this ring. So let's just apply this modifier. And now we have an actual geometry ring. Alt H to unhide everything again. And this thing, we don't need this anymore, so just delete this. Okay, now we have this part, and this part. So everything that should be a separate piece is a separate piece. Now the next step would be, we have to think, okay, what do we want to do with this logo? In my case, I wanted to extrude it a little bit and then give it like a fancy metal material. So let's do the extrusion. I think I want this ring and the font to be the same height. So I'll select both of them in object mode, then go into edit mode. Oh, and I forgot, I have to, of course, convert this thing also into a mesh, because now it's a path. So also go into path settings, set the resolution higher. So if we now convert it into a mesh, we have a lot of polygons. As you can see, it's a very messy topology, and that's where Houdini will come into place. Okay, select those two. A to select everything, and then E, we can drag those up to a value that we like this. And yeah, I think that looks good. And then also grab this. Also didn't convert this. Resolution 60. And object, convert, mesh. Select everything, extrude it up. Yeah, let's make it a little bit higher than the rest. And this thing also. Extrude it also up. Okay, now we got this. Now, the important thing is, Now our topology is just a mess. If you look at this, we have tons of triangles, lots and lots of points. If you would try to bevel those edges, there will definitely be errors, especially in these areas right here. You can't really get bevel to work so that you have round corners. And in this case, if we would leave it like this, it would look like absolute garbage because we don't have any highlights that are catched by the light on the edges. Okay, so what do we do now? We will use Houdini and use a VDB approach to remesh the entire thing. This is, as far as I found, the best approach that you can use to get clean or at least evenly distributed geometry on your text. So let's select everything, then hit File, Export, OBJ, and then call this something and save it out somewhere. Now we are inside of Houdini, and I already opened a file and have everything that I did inside of Houdini in here, but I'll break it down step by step. So as you can see, my layout is a little bit different. If you open Houdini, you will have those parameters down here, but I'll usually just close them most of the time, and then with P you can bring up your parameters. Houdini Apprentice is completely free, you can't use it commercially. Houdini Indie, I think, is about 270 bucks. Yeah, so if you want to use it commercially. Now, with that being said, the first thing I did was drop a file node, or actually, if you have the scene there, you have a geometry container at first, and then you dive in with I or with a double click, and then you are in this geometry network. Here I drop a file node, so with tab you can just type in something, file, click it, drop it down. This is the node that I created here. If you select the node, hit R, then this is highlighted, this is the display flag. Always keep that in mind, that you have to highlight things to see them. Not everything is visible in here. And then hit P, and I just imported with this little thing, navigated to the folder where I saved my previous file. And yeah, imported this. Then we get this thing here with all messed up normals and our ugly topology that we don't want. Now what we can do is isolate every part, because we want to remesh each of the parts that we had in Blender separately. So I have 4 blast nodes for each of the individual pieces, for the font, for this ring, for the inner part, and for the M logo. And then we have 4 blast nodes. If I just come here, blast, we blast everything but our font. And you can do this by clicking this arrow or this picker, and then come over to 3D connected geometry, or geometry groups also works, and then you can select entire pieces. So geometry groups, I selected this, and then hit enter and select delete non-selected. So this means I selected something, and now this exactly what I selected is not deleted, if that makes sense. Otherwise everything would be there except of what I selected. Okay, now then you can do this for every part. For the wing, for the M, and for this inner part. And after that, we want to get a better topology. So what do? We convert this into a VDB. We can do this with a node VDB from polygons. So if you just hit tab, VDB from polygons, there it is. And highlight this. Now in here, we have a few parameters that we can change. By default, this creates a signed distance field. With those little voxels that you can see, it's just a different representation than a usual polygonal model. So you have those little grids that are present in 3D space, and those store a specific value, but this isn't important for now. We convert this into a SDF. This voxel size, the lower this voxel size is, the smaller those individual things are and the more resolution you will have. So if I bring this up, you can see the resolution gets worse and we get those joint things there. We don't want this. So let's put this back. That was, I think, a little bit too high. There we go. After that, we have a VDB smooth SDF, because if we don't have this and convert it back to polygons, we get those jagged edges. So we want to use a VDB smooth in between, which just smooths out those corners. Then we drop a convert VDB, and this convert VDB set to polygons, of course. And now we get this very evenly distributed quartz only geometry. It's very dense, of course. So if you want to reduce the geometry, you can bring up this adaptivity slider to your liking. If you want to use real displacement later on, it would be useful to not use this, but in my case, I think I used this to keep the detail on the edges, but make the geometry more coarse on the flat planes where you don't need it, because I was using a lot of bump maps. Okay, yeah, you just do this for every part, and I splitted those out because now you would have the possibility of making the smoothing, for example, different per piece. So I could make this smoothing less or more, depending on your liking. Of course, this always depends on the logo that you use, and yeah, things like this. Then just drop the merge at the end with everything being converted. Merge, highlight this, and then you get this. And after this, you can right click, save geometry, and then save this, everything you have there, out as a OBJ. Here you can select your file that you want to have, your folder that you want to use, and then you can import it back into Blender, and that's where I will see you again. Okay, so I hope you made it and you understood everything until this point. Now we have our geometry, and I'm in my real scene that I used for the project right now. And you can basically come up to the file and then import OBJ and select the geometry from Houdini. Then you get it imported. Then what I did was I wanted to have a plain background, so I just created a plane in here and placed this down here. Maybe I also relocated the logo. No, I don't think so. I actually just imported it as it was, so it's not exactly in the center there. As you can see, here's the center, and it's slightly offsetted, but in this case it doesn't really matter. So the cameras. Now my main camera is this one right here. So this is where I based on all the lighting at first. So it's basically the logo completely centered. It has a square aspect ratio. You can set this in the output and format, and then 1920 by 1920 pixels is what I set it to. And it's slightly tilted, as you can see. It's just like rotated on the X, so RX and then rotated. Now, I chose this angle as a hero shot because it showed a little bit more form, so you can see the underside of the geometry a little bit, and those highlights also are visible very nicely. So this is what it looked like in this camera view. And by the way, with Control B you can select render regions that you want to have. So Control B, and I just drag over the camera view, and then I have only the camera view. Yeah, so that's it. But let's carry on with the lights. And now we have a lot of lights in here. So let's just maybe hide the cameras for now so that I can show you what we have going on. Normally, when I light a scene, I try to keep it as simple as possible. But if you do logos and things like this, or especially as I did, use very shiny materials, for example, like metal, it's better to have a lot of lights, because you want to set those highlights individually and you want to have as much control over the reflections as you can get. And especially with a material like metal, it's very important how you look at something. So the viewing angle is important. The lighting completely also depends on the camera angles. And yeah, so those are the lights. I basically have 2 fill lights at the sides right here, and they are not very bright, just 10 watts. Of course, this depends on the scene scale, how bright those should be. And yeah, they were mainly there, if I just enable the render view here, to fill in the space around the logo. So they are not really the most important ones. If I just hide them, you can see they don't do a lot. But what they do is, let me just disable this again. And what they do is, for my final camera view, there's not such a strong gradient between a darker shade and a lighter shade. Okay, this light above is very bright. It's set at 2400 watts, but yeah, don't take those numbers exactly if you don't work with the same scale as I do. But the important thing is that it's very bright and it basically illuminates the whole scene a lot more. So also the background. If you see this without this light, it's completely different. What else do we have? Okay, now we got those 2 lights that are not as important. I already touched on those. Then we have this big light, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 smaller lights that I used to individually place highlights on the logo. So maybe to show you what exactly those lights do, I will open another scene here. In here I'll have the rendered view, and in here I'll show you what they do. So let's select this light, for example, and hide it. This illuminates only this little edge there. So I wanted to have the logo not being illuminated all over the same, but I wanted to have those little shadow areas that make it a lot more interesting. So for example, this part is a little less illuminated than, let's say, this part or this part, and also on here and on here. And then I just placed those lights and rotated them and fiddled around with them until I had something that I thought looked good and still looks balanced, so that you don't have a really huge shadow somewhere. Like if I would disable this, would look not as good. Yeah, just try to balance out those shadows and those highlights, and it makes for a very interesting image and looks better than just a plain big light that you shoot down from the top. So as you can see, for example, this light made this highlight there, and you gotta experiment with this. So maybe an important thing to note there is that those lights, I think I made the spread a little lower. So by default, Blender's lights have a very huge spread, which means they illuminate along a very broad range and are not as focused. For example, a laser light would be the extreme of a very tiny spread. If you lower the spread, of course, you can be a little more direct your light a little more towards the exact spot that you want to have it. So that's why those have a little bit of a lower spread than the default values. And yeah, same goes for this light, for example. This illuminates the M logo, Alt H, and this guy and the other side there, because I thought this would still be a little bit too dark. And then you end up with something like this. I think I said the main things about the lights. With lighting, it's always also partially trial and error. You have to... A thing that I actually forgot to tell you also, which is very important for the overall look, is that I turned down the overall brightness just of the world view. So you can go to this world property view and then to surface, and I turned the color to completely black because by default I think it's somewhere grayish, and if it's completely black you just don't get any light from it. If it's gray you still get a little bit of light from just your overall 3D scene, just the surroundings. Okay, and with that I think we have those main lights. We talked about the lights. I already showed you the one camera, the main camera, which is this one. Then I also had another one which was like completely from the top, but oh, actually it's also not completely from the top, but yeah, a little more. But I didn't like this as much in the end. Some other cameras I had were close-up shots. Here, for example, on the A. So if we just go into that, and my screencast keys are disabled again. Let's talk about this. And by the way, all the cameras have a 80mm lens. This just makes it easier to get a nice bokeh effect, as you can see there. And yeah, the viewing area is just smaller, and it makes for a more appealing look, I think, for close-ups. If you want to get this effect in the viewport that you can see the depth of field, you can come up here and select depth of field, because by default this is also turned off. And then in the camera you enable depth of field and select your focus object, either that or you can play with the distance and the f-stop. The lower the f-stop, the more bokeh you will get. So that way I set up this shot with the focus being on the letter there. Then what else do we have? We have a camera that looks down at the Magura logo right here, and I set the focus to be about there, and all the settings about this camera are the same. I also have this little cross in here. You can enable this in the camera settings under viewport display and composition guides, and I just enabled center there. This makes it easier for you to sort of align the scene, so if you want to have something in the middle. Then I had another close-up shot here where we have a little bit of this background element. I thought it looked cool if we had the letter and just a little bit of the logo and the color in there, and the focus being somewhere around there. And again, all those camera settings were exactly the same f-stop. I had one camera that was pretty much 90 degrees. I think it's 90 degrees, yes. And yeah, just to show like just to have one sort of camera setting that shows your font from exactly the top, and also then the surface imperfections that I will add later. Okay, I think those were all the cameras that I set up. Then we can finally move on to the materials. Now I will just close this and drag up a new window and make this a shader editor. Let's start with the material for our font. So this is the material right here. It's still named in German. The namings are a little all over the place. Yeah, so we can see a little bit of stuff here, but don't worry, it's not as difficult as it looks. So what we have here is a noise texture node and a mapping node in there that's wired with an object texture coordinate node. You get those two nodes if you just click the noise texture. I just demonstrate it on a new one, and you hit Ctrl T, and then you get those two nodes, which are mapping and a texture coordinate node. Those help you to map basically a texture node or a noise node or anything similar. And this only works if you have in the preferences the node wrangle add-on enabled. You have to check this little box, and it's delivered with Blender, so you don't have to download anything or buy anything. Okay, then you get those nodes automatically, but you could also just search them and place them down normally. Then we have this noise, and if you hit Control-Shift-Click, you can have a preview only of this noise. So you see I scaled this up quite a bit, have a little bit of roughness, and then I get these nice sort of slightly elongated little dots. Then I've fed this into a color ramp, and with this color ramp, if I also again Control-Shift-Click on this, I just bring in a little more contrast by dragging the black slider up and the white slider down. So basically moving them closer together. This makes it that we have more contrast. And then we can feed this into a bump node. The bump node is basically like a fake displacement. So it seems as if your surface has those imperfections and the lights also react to them. So you feed those in there. Bring down the strength. By default, it's way too much. Yeah, the bump node, we can't really show a highlight there. It's sort of this normal visualization. And we combine this bump with another bump, and we can do this by just wiring this other bump that we want to use into our first bump node. And before that, again, a color ramp, but this time not a noise as up here, but this time we get a image texture. So just Shift A image texture. And then we open a Scratches map. I just used the Scratches map. I think it was free, but unfortunately I don't remember where I got it. It was just in my archive, so to speak. There are a lot of different sites that you can use to get also free resources, or you could maybe also search for CC0 textures. And yeah, just the Creative Commons license images that you can use for your projects for free on Google, for example. Yeah, we also have this mapping node, and we just stretched basically if I just visualize this, we stretched the texture on the x-axis. So if I have this at 1 again, it's not as stretched. And have this at the object level because we don't have any UVs. An object and generated are just sort of simple ways to get a texture onto your geometry without even having a real UV map. And in this case it worked, but it won't always work. So yeah, maybe you might have to actually UV unwrap your model. But yeah, that's always a hassle, and if you can get around UV unwrapping, I always tend to do so. Okay, now we got this. And yes, again, like we did up here, we have this color ramp where we bring the sliders a little bit more together to get contrast. So this is the before, this is the after. Control-Shift-Click. Feed this into the bump, into the other bump, and then into the normal socket. And then we can highlight this. And what else do we have on this principled BSDF? We have a base color, just a little darker. Then we of course have the metallic slider up to 1. And remember, this always has to be 1, even though you think, oh god, this could look good. It's either a metal or non-metal. We like metals, non-metals, and half metals are elements, and yeah, there's nothing in between there. So this slider is either 1 or it's 0. Specular, just leave that to get realistic results. The roughness is a little more down. This would also drastically change the look of things. If you bring it very, like if the roughness is very low, the reflections will be darker, or it'll pick up more of the surroundings. So as you can see, my world around, as I already showed you, is completely black. And then the text will also get a lot darker because you have those very glossy parts of the mesh, and they're just the the light is reflected and is not being dispersed around. So basically you have those black reflections that, yeah, are not the best. So I'll just leave that at my setting. And I think, oh, transmission is up. Don't know why that was up. Transmission, we don't need this. We only need this for glass, but as we have a metal, this didn't affect anything. Okay, and I think that should be already it for this material. So it's very simple, and I think it's very effective. Of course, if you get too close, like at this angle, it also breaks. It doesn't look as realistic anymore. You could take this even further. You could add fingerprints into the roughness maybe. So you would take a black and white image into the roughness, could also manipulate it with a color ramp again. Then you have those nice fingerprints on top of it. I decided to not do so in this case, but yeah, just as an example what you could do with it. Now, what else? Okay, then the model, the materials on the other metallic parts right here are, I think, pretty much the same. The only thing that I might have changed, yeah, see here, for example, I changed the mapping mode to generated, and I might have changed those scaling values, but this will be the case anyways for you if you want to do this on a other model. So you always have to see, in this case I try to approximately match the stripes here and the stripes there, how deep they go and how far they are apart. Yeah, but this is something that you will always have to tweak. But with those nodes, they give you a good basis. With this node wrangler add-on, you can always use this with Ctrl-T. A color ramp is always good to control your node that goes before the color ramp. And then you can feed this black and white information into a bump map, for example, or as a roughness map, or even as a color map, depending on what you want. Then let's have a look at this yellow material in here. So this yellow material for the inner part has exactly this hex value of the original SVG. It was already delivered in the SVG, so we can use this, and I thought it looked cool if we added some subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering, I think I explained it in another video, can't quite remember, but yeah, it's basically if light scatters inside of your object, and this gives it a lot cooler appearance. And other than that, dial down the roughness a bit. And I think that's already it for the material. Like, this can't get really a lot simpler than that. But oftentimes you can get away with very simple materials and they still look cool. And it really comes down to how you light your scene, how you place your cameras and things like that. Now we have, I think, about everything for the metal materials. Let's talk about the background material. So if I just zoom in there, that was a little too far. Also very, very simple. We don't need this. Oh, we do need this. No, we don't need this. Okay. So this right here is the material for the background. I zoomed in a little bit. And what we have is two principled BSDFs, and they are connected into a mix shader, and we have a noise texture that drives the mixture of those two principled BSDFs. So this noise texture is basically the standard noise scaled up very high, because those little dots that you see should be very small, and then feed this into a color ramp, you know the deal, and bring in those two sliders, put that into the factor. So this basically now tells where it's black, we want to have one of the inputs, and where it's white, we want to have the other input. I always mess up the inputs. If you get it wrong, you can just replug those like this. Okay, this is our factor. Then we have this white material, so base color just white. We have the roughness at the default, and we have sheen. I thought sheen looked cool. Normally you use this for cloth, and I thought this finish, this sort of, yeah, it gives just the material a little bit more character, makes it more interesting to have this effect. Okay, yep, I think that's it for the principled shader. Then we also used a bump map. You can see those little bumps there in the white parts. So again, just a noise texture with a high scale, a color ramp, a bump set to a very low strength, and throw that into the normal. And the other part, those little dots here, are just a gray base color. I think I actually chose the same color as the metal base color. Dialed the metallic slider up to 1. Roughness, yeah, 0.4, 0.5. And transmission again, up. We don't need transmission. And this is it. So we have those two principled shaders that drive with this factor. With that being said, I think we are already pretty far in our process. I hope you could follow everything so far. If you have any problems, always feel free to reach out via the comment section or via my Instagram. It'll be also down in the description. And to finish it off, maybe I can just show you how I rendered out those images and then what we did in post, just to spice up the renders a bit. So yeah, let's say I am in this render view here. I already showed you at the beginning that I set this to be 1920 pixels by 1920 pixels. That's the way that I rendered it out, every camera angle that I have. And for the sampling, you have to go to sampling, render. I selected 1000 samples. Maybe you could even get away with a little bit lower samples and then denoise, but I thought it went pretty quickly. That's why I set this to 1000 samples. And then also in the performance, you can, depending on your machine, you can change this tile size here. So this basically means how much does your render engine, how many pixels does it work on at the same time. So as I am rendering with my graphics card, you can set this to 256 or 512, and yeah, it'll be optimized this way. Yeah, of course, we also have cycles, GPU compute. And for the rendering, I think that was already it. Maybe in the light paths, okay, I adjusted the light paths a little bit, added some more diffuse and glossy passes, I think. But really nothing special there, and nothing you could also figure out, I think. Okay, so for you guys, I just rendered out this image just to demonstrate you how it's done. And you can come up to image over here and say save as. And then just navigate to your folder, save the image, and here you can specify what you want to have. In my case, I saved out as a PNG with RGB. We don't need an alpha channel, so no RGBA. I set the color depth to 16-bit, and this just gives us a little bit more control in post-production. We will just do a few adjustments in Photoshop, and yeah, then you can save this out. And let's jump into Photoshop now. So the way I showed you how to render out this image, I did this for the different camera setting. And then we get this image right here. This is the clean image, and I think it already looks pretty good. Like, a lot of renderings don't look as crispy straight out of Blender. So right click makes a smart object, and my Photoshop is in German, so I hope you can follow along still. So I add those adjustment layers. You have white balance, and just bring the whites to this end of this hole, and in there it's okay. And then what else did I do? I did some dynamic and just bring that up a bit. And also some curves where you just darken the darks a bit and brighten the brights, so basically adding a bit of contrast. And I think that was already what I did for the renderings. I did this basically for everything. Only thing I might have already also done is add in a noise. So a little bit of noise. I also always think it makes the image a little bit more interesting and saturated. So just 1 in the noise strength and hit apply, and then we get something like this. With that being said, I guess we talked about everything. So I pretty much showed you most of the steps, and I hope you could follow along. If you should still have any questions left, you can always ask them. You can just shoot me a DM via Instagram or write your questions down in the comments below. Hit me up on Behance, whatever you like. I'm always happy to help. So with that being said, I hope to upload videos more regularly from now on. Fingers crossed. Yeah, but I hope I will see you then. Bye.